probably one of the greatest ongoing challenges that we have in our life is learning how to respond with wisdom. And what is wisdom? And so, wisdom isn't just knowledge. Wisdom isn't just compassion. Wisdom isn't a singular thing. It's a combination of things. And in fact, let me read to you a verse here out of the book of Proverbs. And it's Proverbs chapter 4 and verse 7. And it says, the beginning of wisdom. In other words, the actual start to having wisdom is this: get wisdom. What an incredible statement. The beginning is to realize you don't have it. That's the beginning. To realize that this is something that you must go and accumulate, that this is effort that you must put in, that this is dedication on your part, that this is recognition of your inabilities, and then the willingness to not just say, well, I can't do that, but to say, I can't do that, so therefore I must learn how to do that. I must give myself the opportunity to learn that. And so what an incredible opening of what is wisdom? Well, the beginning of wisdom is go get it. As the book of Job is a beautiful example of this, because Job experiences this horrific loss, these terrible circumstances of his life, and his friends show up. And as they show up, the first thing we see is, and it's often noted as a good thing. In fact, I've noted it as a good thing, but one of the things that we're challenged to consider, that James Hill challenges us to consider, is this thought that maybe they shouldn't have been quiet for 7 days. Maybe they should have said some things like, I am so sorry, Job. Maybe they should have said some things like, I certainly wish this had not happened to you, Job. Maybe they should have said some things like, Job, we're here for you. What can we do? I'm going to sit with you. I'm going to bring you food. They probably should have said something, is Hilt's argument. And I think that bears some consideration. And then they immediately abandon it. So they sit there for 7 days and they're quiet. And then Job says some things, and Eliphaz says, I've known you for many years, and I've known that you're a good guy. I've known that you're an upright man. I know all these things about you. And then he uses probably the largest word in the English language, and it is certainly a friend of mine, and it's probably a friend of yours, but. You ever said it to your kids? I know you have a 92 in that class, but you did not study for this test. I know you make your bed consistently, but you did not make it today. Oh, there's just that moment where the self has to rise up, or at least we feel like it has to, and it has to show its authority. It has to show its power, and that happens with Job and his friends, and it becomes the downfall of the friends. They should have just left Job alone. They would have been better off not even going for their own sake, because, in fact, at the end, God tells them, you need to go ask Job to pray for you, because you all have destroyed and perverted what you say about me. And that's within the context of the fact that they said really good things about God, really truthful things about God, but they distorted it because they ran it through the lens of how it worked for them and how they perceived it should be. And by the way, think about this for just a moment. If Job had agreed with his friends, do you realize he would have accomplished Satan's purpose? That he would have cursed God in the end? But Job said, no, I'm upright. I did not do anything that would cause this to come upon me. And so the very first thing we see about wisdom is you have to get it, which means we should step into a lot of circumstances and a lot of situations and ask God for something that we feel like we're not equipped to. That's number one. The second thing, a part of that, is we need to learn what the ways of Jesus are. Matthew chapter 7, verses 24 through 27, Jesus said this, therefore whoever hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man. And then look at how he describes the wise man who built his house on the rock. In other words, he ordered his actions based on what his underlying foundation was. And then the foolish man is the opposite. He orders his actions also based on what his underlying foundation was, but his foundation was not in Christ. His foundation was in himself, and it was sinking sand. And we know that story, and ultimately that home is destroyed. And so we need to begin to order ourselves into following Jesus. What is the behavior of Jesus? We're actually looking at the spiritual practices that help us follow the behavior of Jesus. And so how do we do that? Well, another way we do that is in Psalm chapter 1, verses 1 through 3. It says this: "Blessed is the one who does not walk in step with the wicked, or stand in the way that sinners take, or sit in the company of mockers, but whose delight is in the law of the Lord, and who meditate on his law day and night." Now listen to this description. "That person is like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in season, and whose leaf does not wither. Whatever they do prospers." The reality of wisdom is this: it is a growth process. It is steady abiding, steady trusting. It is ordering our paths. It is bringing into practice the things that will allow us to exhibit the wisdom of God in the circumstances and moments of our lives. In fact, the story of Job reveals to us that although Job would speak and the friends would listen to him, they only listened to condemn. And because of that, they completely abandoned wisdom. The knowledge they had of God was used as a weapon against Job, as opposed to asking God how they should minister to Job in his circumstances. And so they completely abandoned Job for the satisfaction of self, and that is the abandonment of wisdom. Let me read a passage to you here just to kind of give you a finale and then ask some questions. It says this: "God is in tune to how we treat and view others. He expects the righteous to exercise wisdom when dealing with others." Briefly, exercising wisdom includes accurately assessing where others are emotionally, socially, and spiritually, especially when in distress. It is sensing what they need most. Not what we want to give them the most, what they actually need the most. Then, having made this assessment, words are carefully chosen to meet those needs, to build and encourage those people. This quote from James Hill. And so the question that we're left with is this: how do we do that? Do I act like Job's friends? Does my behavior look a lot like Job's friends? I sit there and I listen just so I can jump in and condemn. And I have to confess that many times that is my natural tendency to do. And then ask ourselves, where is God showing me I should change in my behaviors in my relationships with others? And then another great thing would be to read the Gospels. I love the Gospel of Luke. It's my favorite gospel, story after story after story. And we see how Jesus handles others with love, compassion, discretion, and even confrontation at times. So work on wisdom, how to have a better relationship with anybody.